every moment, but see, we so competitive. The bottom made the level, and I never miss a supper. But still, my hunger's like a model at a buffet. And with these broads who want love, they ain't seen better. But dollar signs, never mind, and he keep a zero. And if my heart can speak, if we talk to freaks and leave the room, wanna try to sleep with her. Getting by, watching time fly. Tell my I'ma get them if they gon' ride. Young, wild, living the dream, although I'm not who I'm destined to be. They keep saying, grow up. On my all, what would you think of it? We've been on this long road accumulating luggage. And as time proceeds, preoccupied with everything, I think it's about time that we sing of nothing. We've been on this long road accumulating luggage. And as time proceeds, preoccupied with everything, I think it's about time that I sing of nothing.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Dr. Philip Fletcher here, and welcome, to another week of the Humanity Matters Weekly, where we discuss and reflect on faith and philosophy, nonprofit leadership, social issues. We want to engage in ideas on what it means to be human, what it means to be a free human being in pursuit of human flourishing. And so, hey, you want to connect with me, make sure you like my Facebook page, Dr. Philip Fletcher, separate from my personal page. Also, connect with my nonprofits. There's a City of Hope Outreach. You can find us on Facebook, as well as the internet, coho58.org. Our housing initiative, Hope Village Coho. I find that as well here on Facebook and on our internets, hopevillagecoho.org, and then our nonprofit startup initiative, Replicate. You can find that on Facebook. We're seeking to serve people. Also, you can find me on YouTube. Just look up Humanity Matters. Also on Twitter at Phil Fletcher, and then on the IG Instagram, Dr. Philip Fletcher. So glad for you to drop in for a minute, hear what I got to talk about. We've got some good stuff to talk about today. Just some things that's been going on this week. We're going to get into some thoughts on value propositions. We're going to talk about, hey, what's the future? What's going on after COVID? And then Joe Biden, the Democratic presidential nominee, Joe Biden. Hey, so, as always, if you got a question for me, you can drop it in the comment section, or you can send me an email at humanitymatterspodcast@gmail.com, humanitymatterspodcast@gmail.com, and I would love to connect with you. So the thought for today comes from Walter Brueggemann and his book, a very influential book in my life, Prophetic Imagination. And Walter says this in the subtitle of Hope and Yearning. So he is riffing on hope. And he says this, and I quote, "Hope on one hand is an absurdity too embarrassing to speak about, for it flies in the face of all those claims we have been told are facts. Hope is the refusal to accept the reading of reality, which is the majority opinion, and one does that only at great political and existential risk. On the other hand, hope is subversive." I like that. Hope is subversive, for it limits the grandiose pretension of the present, daring to announce that the present, to which we have all made commitments, is now called into question. Close quote. So that is from my friend and yours, Walter Brueggemann. Pick up that book, The Prophetic Imagination. Highly recommend it. It's been very influential in my life and work. Hey, coming up, we're doing Meet the Candidates 2020. Now, did this 2 years ago, sitting with different candidates at the city, state, and national level, and having that opportunity to do that again. And so on the slate coming up, I'll be sitting down with Senator Joyce Elliott. She is the Arkansas State Senator down in the Little Rock area. And that video will be published on Tuesday, September 8th, 2020. So I'm looking forward to sitting down with this very influential lady here in the state of Arkansas. She is the Democratic candidate for the 2nd Congressional District. and she is running against the incumbent Congressman French Hill. I interviewed him 2 years ago. I've got an invite out to him again. I want to give equal opportunity for these men and women to sit down, and we're going to discuss things: poverty, race, Corona, obviously, and just things that are going on and how they want to serve the men and women and children of Arkansas in that term. So that'll be September 8th. Everybody be able to see that video. It'll be recorded. I'm sitting down with her prior to that, and so looking forward to that discussion. Also on the slate is the libertarian, yes, I said libertarian, right? U.S. Senate candidate Ricky Dale Harrington. I'll be sitting down with him, and that video will be published after my sit down with Joyce Elliott. And so Ricky Dale Harrington, he is running against the incumbent U.S. Senator Tom Cotton, and I have an invite out to him as well. Hope to sit down with him. And so, hey, there's somebody running against Tom Cotton, right? I know he was profiled in some different magazines and news outlets about a week or two ago. And so looking forward to sitting down with this young man and hearing what he wants to bring to the table and bring a U.S. Senator, God willing. So Meet the Candidates 2020 is coming up. Be looking for those videos here at my page, but also on the YouTube page as well. So welcome again to the Humanity Matters Weekly. I'm your host, Dr. Philip Fletcher, and we are going to dig into quickly value propositions. So think about this. Think about this. If you were to do a survey, 10 people, right? More than likely, those 10 persons, right? Rational, reasonable individuals, okay? Not knowing anything about their social background, economic background, political persuasion, religious persuasion. If you were to ask people, hey, do you think people should eat? 10 out of 10, okay, would say yes. All right, we'll give 9 out of 10. We'll leave room for that one person that's an outlier, okay? If you were to ask somebody, hey, do you think it's appropriate for us to address what is going on with COVID? All right. More than likely, a reasonable, rational human being is going to say, well, yeah, I don't want to see people get sick. Obviously, I don't want to see people die. We want to address that. All right. So more than likely, on issues that are related to the human experience and the opportunity for people to flourish as human beings and be free from any type of restrictions that are imposed upon them, right? To prevent them from flourishing as a human being, you're going to get pretty much common agreement, all right? You're going to get common agreement on those particular things, not knowing a person's religious background, not knowing their economic, social, political leanings. You get common agreement. Where the rubber kind of we get into the issues is that we arrive at different approaches based on how we view the information. So when we get the information, all right, we're looking at it. And then as we're looking at this information, now our values and our beliefs, all right, our political persuasion, where we live, influences of family, education, things like that. We begin to look at that information and we're like, okay, yeah, I don't want to see children starve, right? And so then this is where we start to have a divide, right? So there is the common agreement. Yeah, I don't want to see kids starve. But when individuals start to look at the information, what happens is we start to get on these different roads. Some want to say, hey, I want, central planning to address this. You've got others on the other side that said, hey, everybody needs to determine for themselves how they want to help people. You've got, then you move through the middle. You've got less central planning, more individual responsibility. You've got more individual responsibility, less central planning. But the reason we have these distinctions is we've moved on from what our common agreement is. Nobody wants to see anybody hungry. People don't want to see people homeless. People don't want to see people sick and dying. But we look at the information and look, you know what? I think it should be done this way. I think it should be done this way. And then you have these people around the table that are like, you know what? Yeah, I disagree with you. And what can happen is that these individuals, because they disagree on approaches, begin to then say, you know what? I don't think you really want to see kids eating. You know, that's not what I said. I agree with you that I want to see kids eat. I agree with you that I want to see people live somewhere, quality housing, so on and so forth. Where we have a disagreement is how to go about that. So, what is the solution then? Well, let's remember what we agree on. Then understand that there's going to be different approaches based off of a number of factors. So it's important that we consider that thing. So as you are having discussions, whether it's about COVID, right, school reopenings, politics, what are the values that you agree on? And then once you understand that you have agreement on the fundamentals, all right, then from there, not treating one another as enemies, someone to do battle with, see that individual or group that you're sitting across the table with and saying, hey, you know what? Now that we know what we agree on, let's try to have some compromise as to addressing this. I said the word compromise because in any relationships, compromise is important. Which leads me to the next topic, the future after COVID. So, the future after COVID. So, since March up until now, a lot of moral arguments have been made by those responding to COVID through closures, masks, and in some cases, hey, we got to get a vaccine. We need a vaccine. And so moral arguments have been made. What I mean by moral arguments, that the right thing to do is to close. The right thing to do is to wear masks. The right thing to do is to make sure that people have and take a vaccine. All right. Now, remember again, what's the value proposition? All of us can agree rational, reasonable people don't want to see people get sick and don't want to see people die. All right. Out of matter of self-interest, because I don't want to see myself sick. I don't want to see myself die. But then also, I don't want to see a loved one sick or dying as well. And so the future after COVID. So you're hearing these moral arguments about doing the right thing. Why? Because it impacts public health. It's for the societal good. But here's the thing. Moral arguments that then seek to be backed up through coercion, government action, executive orders and ordinances, and societal pressures, those moral arguments begin to lose their force. Their moral arguments begin to lose their force. So what do I mean? So the moral arguments begin to lose their force, their strength, their potency when punitive action comes about because of non-compliance or guilt or shame is used. So now what? Because what I've been informed about since March up until now is that you have to do this for the public good, for societal good, for the public health of others. And to do otherwise, you're not doing the right thing. You are not loving your neighbor. You are not considering the needs of somebody else. So it has me think about my own work, coho58.org. Check it out. All right. So we help with education. We help with housing for the homeless. We got a men's home called the Hope Home. We are in the midst of a building project called Hope Village, which is 10 small homes. And we do some other work, gardens, very important things, like I said, nonprofit startups. So how will we respond to the issues that were already going on prior to COVID happening? Because we were wrestling with homelessness, lack of grocery stores in some areas, limitations on housing and income. So am I now to understand that I need to make the moral argument that it is right for all the citizens of Conway, for the sake of the public health of 900 or so homeless persons, that you must support Hope Village? And if you don't support Hope Village financially or sharing of information or things like that, you just don't like the homeless. You just don't love the homeless. You're not loving your homeless neighbor. What regards to food pantries, if you are not every week or every other week purchasing food and donating it to one of the local food pantries in your area, then am I to then assume, using the principles that have been laid out in response to COVID, am I to then assume that you are not doing the right thing to support these food shelters who are providing food for the public health and welfare of individuals? And I think, just me reflecting on this, a precedent has been established, all right, for someone like myself, even though I wouldn't do this, but someone like myself to advance a vision of the world through the means demonstrated through the last few months. And what do I mean is this: could I go to my city council or to my governor and say, hey, I need an ordinance or an executive order to make sure all the homeless are housed in the city of Conway or the state of Arkansas? Could I go to the city council or my governor and seek an ordinance or a executive order mandating, all right, that food shelters be supported by every citizen within the city or the state? Why? Because it's a public health issue. Men, women not having adequate housing, people not getting appropriate food, something to think about. All right. I firmly believe in persuasion. And then who comes along, comes along. I believe that brings strength to the moral arguments that we're making with some of the things that are going on in our society. So those are my thoughts on it. So, hey, I'm Dr. Philip Fletcher, and I am just going through different topics today. We've talked about value propositions. What's the future after COVID? Now let's talk about Joe Biden. Now, good old Joe. All right, good old Joe. Now, Joe has stepped in it twice over the past few months in regards to Black Americans in relationship to voting. You know, it's an election season. He is the presumptive Democratic nominee who would run against the president, Donald Trump, and also Joe Jorgensen, who is the Libertarian candidate. So if you listen a few weeks ago, Joe Biden was on Charlemagne the God's show, The Breakfast Club. And he said this, all right, Joe Biden did, and I quote, well, I tell you what, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't Black, close quote. All right, well, like, oh, okay. Like, my Blackness is in question if I am trying to figure out whether I'm for you or President Trump. The implication is if I'm from Trump, then I'm not Black. You know, Biden came out and he kind of pulled back on his statement. All right, give some grace. But then, good old Joe, last week on a interview, and I'm working on an essay about this, and I'll make sure to post these things. He says this, and I quote, and this is in the context of discussing immigration and the Latino community. All right. And here's part of his response. All right. Quote, unlike the African American community, with notable exceptions, I don't know who that is, the Latino community is an incredibly diverse community with incredibly diverse attitudes about different things. Close quote. Biden said, quote, you go to Florida, you find a very different attitude about immigration than you do in Arizona. So it's a very diverse community, close quote. So what former Vice President Joe Biden does is he contrasts the African American community with the Latino community. And what he is saying is the African American community is not diverse in thought in regards to immigration, whereas the Latino community is diverse. Close quote. I want to honor what he said. All right. So, hey, so I don't want to judge whether or not former Vice President Joseph Biden is the appropriate nominee for the Democratic Party. It's not my place of this. All right. What I'm trying to understand is why does he keep saying things like this? Because they're similar. They're coming from a similar place, a similar idea, conception about how he views men and women who are Black or African American, his terms. All right. So typically, when you talk about race in America, it's typically centered around Blacks and white relationships. All right. And then there's other, side conversations that'll happen between other ethnic groups. But typically, when you're talking about race, more often than not, it is a discussion about relationships, interpersonal relationships, intergroup relationships between Blacks and whites. All right. So persons are identified and approached on the basis of group membership. That's kind of like how our society is like, hey, I see Philip, right? Philip is a representative of the Black community or the African American community, whatever is your flavor. All right. And so when I'm looked at that way, and the reason I'm looked at that way is because I have some phenotypical biological traits that say, hey, he's Black, he's not white, or he's not Asian or Native American. He is Black. All right. So because of that, that means that I have a shared culture, shared history, shared behaviors. I'm just representative of the group. All right. So what Mr. Biden is practicing is something called racial essentialism. All right. What is racial essentialism? So a researcher, Stubblefield, says this, and I quote, with essentialists, conceptions of race hold that the characteristics of physical appearance referred to by racial terms are indicative or more profound characteristics of personality, inclinations, culture, heritage, cognitive abilities, or natural talents that are taken to be shared by all members of a racially defined group. So racial essentialism. So when you see me, you're operating off an assumption. All right. I am representative of this group. Well, what group are you talking about? Okay. What group? So Henry Louis Gates, smart man, check him out. Smart man. All right. Henry Louis Gates says this about groups. How do we arrive at groups? You got Blacks, whites, Asians, so on and so forth. And he says this, that groups are the result of what could be described as societal discourse. So society gets together and they look at these persons that are representative because of their biological characteristics, in this case, because of skin color, right? And an idea is infused on that group, all right? So through societal discourse, communication, written, spoken, now, video, what we've got going on today, the society says of this, puts an idea about that group on this group. And then when an individual who represents that group is seen out in the larger society, everybody else looks at that individual and says, hey, yeah, that's a black man. So a black man, an idea about a black man is A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, because all black men are like that, right? So there's a 2013 study that said, you know what, essentialism actually impedes creativity. So some researchers, they hypothesized that once essentialism is activated, all right, once individuals are using that to negotiate a particular situation that is going on with them in their human experience, all right, they found, okay, that closed-mindedness can occur. All right. The researchers found that participants primed with an essentialist viewpoint were less creative, solving significant fewer word problems. They use word problems to test their samples. All right. Results from a follow-up study showed that the link between racial essentialism and decreased creativity could be explained, at least in part, by an increase in closed-mindedness. Wow. So when you meet somebody who is different or goes against the idea that has been attached to that group, you can get phrases like was told to me once, wow, you're a different kind of black man. You are out of the norm. Racial essentialism. All right. So there's a different concept that is called non-essentialism. All right. So a non-essentialist conception of race claims that similarities and differences in physical appearance do not entail further similarities and differences. All right. So I'm favorable to this approach. All right. If you paid attention to me to any length of time, I'm looking at the individual first, not trying to pigeonhole people into groups. I want to take people as they come and not make any type of assumptions about someone on the basis of their skin color. All right. In other words, as Martin Luther King said, it's the context of character rather than the color of skin. So I invite you to check out Henry Louis Gates. All right. Also, another guy, young guy, Camille Foster. He's Kmele Foster, who has some much added things to this conversation about racial essentialism versus non-essentialism. So what does that mean? Let's get down to the nitty gritty. All right. So we got through the scholarly type stuff. Right. So today, what does that mean? How can we avoid the errors of former Vice President Joe Biden, whose comments are rooted, in my estimation, in racial essentialism? All right. So former Vice President Joe Biden is emblematic of a person who expresses an idea about men and women who are categorized as Black in America. So his racial essentialism that was shown on The Breakfast Club, and then this past week in his interview on Yahoo, it demonstrates he is an individual who uses racial characteristics to conclude a particular behavior. Here's an assumption: if you're Black, you're going to vote for him. But he's also, because you're Black, you all think the same way. Well, I did some study, right? So Pew Research did some studies, right? So we're going to look at three things real quick: COVID, confidence in the police force, and immigration, since that was the context of Mr. Biden's most recent quote about the groupthink of Black Americans versus the diverse thinking that happens within the Latino community. So a study was conducted by the Pew Research Journal, June 16th through 22nd of 2020, had a sample size of 4,700 people, 8 people, all right? And it was asked of Black voters, the percentage of Black voters responded, if election rules were changed to make it easier to register to vote, would that affect election security? 27% of Black voters said less secure. 70% said not any less secure. So there's no unanimity of thought. All right. What about confidence in police force? So the Pew Research did a study 1 month before the George Floyd incident. So between April 20th to April 26th, they interviewed 10,139 persons, and looking at Black Americans, 16% had a great deal of confidence in the police force. 41%, a fair amount of confidence in the police force. Okay, again, not unanimity of thought. And when you dig deeper, when you get into age groups 18 to 39, 49%. All right. Age group 40 to 54, 51%. And then 55 and older, 68%. So you see, the younger it gets, the less confidence it is. But the older you have, the more confidence. Again, diversity. Finally, what about immigration views? Since Biden referenced this. So Pew Research did a study January 9th through the 14th of 2019. All right. And they sampled 1,505 respondents. All right. And so 2 questions to pull out here. The percentage of Blacks who think most of the immigrants who are now living in the U.S. are here illegally, 47% of Blacks. And the percentage of Blacks who think most of the immigrants who are now living in the U.S. are here legally, 43% of Blacks. All right, so it's pretty even split. All right. Then a second question, the percentage of Blacks who favor or oppose substantially expanding the wall along the U.S. border with Mexico. All right. 79% opposed it, 20% were in favor of it. So let's look at the facts. All right. Our facts need to challenge old assumptions. All right. And in this case, it's demonstrated that what Mr. Biden is asserting is just not true. Now, I know he did a follow-up, but I think it's important for us to look at the data, look at the information, and see what people are saying. All right. So I have more on that to say, but essentially, how is it that we are going to pursue hope and justice for one another? And I think it is very important that more and more, if we want to move forward and pursue correction in a lot of the inequities that are going on in our nation, that it's important that we look at each other as individuals, all right? And then looking at each other as individuals, you begin to see, hey, you're dealing with that police issue? Oh, you're dealing with that police issue? Oh, okay. You're dealing with that police issue? Oh, okay. Let's do something about that. If we want to address injustices, then we have to move beyond keeping it at a discussion about race. Because soon as race is interjected into the discussion, right, people start going into their different corners and people start, protecting their group, and the opportunity to produce solutions that are going to be most beneficial and just to everybody here in our society is going to be stalled or not even taken into consideration because we keep arguing about race and not the issue at hand. Hey, glad y'all joined me for the Humanity Matters Weekly. I am your host, Dr. Philip Fletcher. I'm glad you have joined me. Hey, again, connect with me here on my Facebook page, Dr. Philip Fletcher. Also, like the City of Hope Outreach, like Hope Village, like Replicate. You can find us also, our websites, coho58.org, hopevillagecoho.org. Also, my personal website, philipfletcher.org. Check out the podcast, Humanity Matters. And also find me on YouTube, look at Humanity Matters. And then you can find me on Twitter at Phil Fletcher, Instagram, Dr. Philip Fletcher. Also on TikTok. Hey, got to have a little fun. So appreciate y'all very much. We'll be taking a 1-week hiatus as I am taking my youngest to college on Friday. So be dealing with that, getting her set up for Fayetteville, Arkansas. She's becoming a Razorback. So pretty excited about that. So as always, remember to be loved, to be kind, to be generous. And remember to live in hope, that hope that's subversive, like Walter Brueggemann talk about. We can do the impossible. Y'all take care, and God bless.